Hello and welcome back to another episode of Myths, Magic, and Movies here in the Movie Pope channel. It's been quite a while since we've actually done one of these because most of the time we've either been focusing on true crime or me gabbing on about the Gothic in my own little weird space in my cartoon form, which you can check out. But today we are going to be talking about something that is kind of unique, something that I truly have no understanding of, but nevertheless I have an interest in and I do want to learn a lot about. So I brought a special guest in today to have that chat with me. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. We've got a lot of shows on this channel. If you want to hear Lee talk about movies and gab on and on about how he's right and I'm wrong, we have reviews every Friday and we have trailer reactions every Wednesday. If you prefer a more animated review, check out The Robot on Mondays and Thespians and Myth, Magic, and Movies on Tuesdays. So at the time of recording, we're a few days off from Halloween, and what I really want to talk about today is Latin folklore and superstition. Now, living here in the United States, it's something that we're pretty much introduced to from a very young age because we live in a society that's been famously described as a melting pot. You can walk down the street and go to Chinatown and have some dim sum, but also enjoy mass wrestling on TV. But even though we're exposed to it, we're not really familiar with it. So with me today is theater director Jackie Obando Carter. You've been on the show previously, and I'm so happy to have you on. Jackie, how are you doing on this Wednesday afternoon? A few days before the big H.
I'm doing good. Definitely gloomy weather out there, very fitting for this
It's
season.
very
How are you?
appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so Jackie, the reason why I wanted you on is because I remember when we spoke last time, you did mention that Latin and Hispanic superstitions were kind of your favorite things to kind of discuss, and I figured you'd be probably the best person to have a chat with and sort of introduce me to this world because there isn't that much that I would say most of us really know about it. I mean, apart from La Llorona, which was popularized by the Conjuring verse with the Curse of La Llorona and
hmm
Dia de los Muertos, we really don't know that much about that. So can you kind of give us a crash course? Well, not a crash course, but can you give us an introduction as to what your exposure is and how you're familiar with it or lack of familiarity with these beliefs and characters?
Sure. So I'm Costa Rican, and something that you'll find with the Latin American culture, it's depending on where you're from, you will have grown up with different things. So Dia de los Muertos is more Mexican and not something I was really exposed to until I was a lot older, since I'm Costa Rican, and that's primarily a Mexican holiday that was celebrated. And so
Hmm.
I would say that overall, what most people in the United States of America are exposed to is going to be very specifically Mexican. And a lot of things that are Mexican, you can also find in other countries as well, but everything almost has its twist. Like La Llorona, it has so many different versions to it. So La Llorona, like the big thing that I grew up with before we had the movie and everything, because like nobody knew La Llorona until that movie came out.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
La Llorona is like a folk song. That there was a folk song written about it, and there's like countless verses, and depending on where you're from, there's going to be different variations of how you sing it. And I think even in Coco, the Disney movie, like they have their verses that they sing there. And so, like, everyone talks about La Llorona being like in white and ghost light. Like, oh, no, 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 no. La Llorona is in azul celeste because that's what's in the song. So she's known to come out in light blue. So that was always a thing until I'm guessing it was the movie that suddenly like, oh no, she comes out in white. That's not that was never really a thing that I grew up with. And there's so many variations of the story La Llorona, and it kind of depends on where you grew up. Like the basis of the story is that it is a woman going around weeping for her children that drowned in the river, but it could be that she drowned them. It
Hmm.
could be that they just drowned and now she wants everyone to suffer just like she did because she lost her children. And then there's different reasons for why she drowned them. If she drowned them, I think one of my most favorite ones that I encountered when I was studying Medea for Greek mythology, and this is kind of the when I first started to see that really a lot of these folklore things, you can find variations of them in just about every culture. So
Yeah.
just like in Medea, where the story with her is that she marries this guy and leaves her country, and that they have children together, but then he has an affair, and so in a jealous fit of rage, she kills their children. It's kind of the same thing like with La Llorona. You can find variations where she gets mad that her husband has an affair, and so then she kills the children. Other variations say they were never married, they were just lovers. Sometimes the husband, they'll say, is like Hernan Cortes, who was a famous conquistadors. It's just no matter where you are, it's like the same kind of heart of the story, but they're all very, very different. And then also the story can get told, I guess it kind of depends when you're exposed to it. So like for me as a kid growing up with that story, it was a you better behave. And I think that was like what a lot of young children were exposed to. It was like, cállate, si no te la llorona te va a encontrar. So like quiet, or the la llorona is gonna come find you and she's gonna drown you. She's gonna get you. So it would be
Yeah.
used for like or misbehaving, like don't do that. Um, so, and then again, with the different legends of sometimes La Llorona just goes after the children. Other times, she's going after the men who are fooling around. And then I haven't heard this one as much, but I was doing research into it. Sometimes they're like, she kills whoever she wants. Like, she's just
Right.
out for, like, to kill anybody and everybody. I first delved into it a lot deeper though when I worked on a play called Borderline, because they had kind of like a really neat allegory for La Llorona. Because in La Llorona,
Hmm.
the premise is that she's stuck as a ghost, constantly wailing and weeping and looking for her children. And so in Borderline, Andrew Ciañez de la O, when he wrote this show, there was going back to the azul celeste, the light blue colored dress. It was very specifically written in his script that this mother figure, she wasn't actually a mother, but she was essentially representing a mother figure. She was like the older sister watching out over children, and she just happened to be going to homecoming in a light blue colored dress. And then these kids get lost in the desert right on the Texas Mexico border. So she actually spends the play trying to go out and find the kids and rescue them. And so I just love how like that allegory was, it was thrown in there. She was spoken about as if she was La Llorona, but then it was like different. It was like a softer side of her. Because if you think about it, like she would have not always been a monster, because really all monsters, like they, especially right now with people talking about how characters are, there's some sort of humanity in there. Another one that I grew up with a lot was El Chupacabra,
Yep.
because that became really, really big in the 90s. I actually was in Costa Rica when the Chupacabra got to be a really, really big thing.
Now, so is the chupacabra more of a Mexican or Central American thing? That's something that I've always been a little bit confused about because La Llorona, from my understanding, has mostly been interpreted through a Mexican, perspective. But the chupacabra, I'm not quite sure. Like, is he something that is kind of analogous to the predator, in Central America, or is he like a skinwalker? What exactly is this thing?
I would say El Chupacabra is definitely Latin American. I would actually even push to say La Llorona. I think the movies and things made it primarily Mexican, but I never was growing up told like, oh, this is just a Mexican thing. I kind of think it's more Latin American, because I guess when you get into some of the things with the Aztec gods, that ends up
Mhm.
almost being more Mexican. So I would say El Chupacabra is for sure Latin American and not like primarily just a Mexican thing, and I mean, there's different ways that people would look at it, because I know when I was a kid, my grandma would just tell me like, oh, it's like the vampire bats going out. That's really what it is. Because I remember being a kid and like watching the news and be like, oh my gosh, chupacabra sighting. And they'd have like these videos. And then some of the things that I think historically that they recorded were wolves and coyotes that got like rabies or something. Because I know it would get described as like they were hairless or like had the rabies foam coming out of the mouth and things. But I
Yeah.
know it was an actual scare that was happening to farmers because they were losing livestock, so things were happening, but it just kind of turned into this whole like, let's make a monster of it. But there was probably not an actual chupacabra. But
Yeah.
then now it kind of grew and became its own legend, and now even it's got its own movie where like there's this cute little furry monster that's like, that's not really a monster. These kids trapped it in the barn, and then they're now friends with a chupacabra. But like, I
I
was
remember
legit scared I was gonna get bit by a chupacabra as a child.
I was gonna say too, because because and you probably heard this too, like a lot of legends are based on actual facts. So what to go back to your point earlier, it could have been, if you've ever encountered a rabid animal, um if you run into these creatures, it's not a fun thing to see, because
Yeah.
they look like they're demonically possessed, and the way that they behave, it's not normal. So obviously the poor farmer who's going out to investigate, what's going on with this flock, he comes, and sees a bunch of dead sheep, and he sees this, creature, this animal behaving in a way that's not normal. They're probably thinking, holy shit, like, what is
Yeah.
this? Like, like it's not a coyote, because a coyote wouldn't look like that, and they wouldn't do that. um but another thing too is is and you can, and please feel free to correct me on this one. I've always assumed that especially with the native people in, in the Americas prior to, European settlement, there sort of been this belief that, that humans can sort of exchange their forms with animals, right? What some Native Americans would call the skinwalker, or what, in European folklore we would call a werewolf, right? Has has that has that belief kind of transmuted itself into Latin American culture, or is it seen more as, well, it's nice, but that's more of a Navajo thing, or that's more of a French thing, or that's more of a European or Scandinavian belief. We have this here. Thank you very much. We're happy with our chupacabras. You can keep your werewolves and Baba Yagas over there. We don't want that stuff. As is that the kind of mindset that kind of occurs, and are there any sort of analogies, or do they kind of, or do these beliefs sort of find a sort of kind of blend together in a sort of syncretistic kind of melding over the centuries?
Oh no, it's definitely still there, mostly with like the Aztec gods, like Quetzalcoatl. I'm probably saying that totally wrong.
Yeah, the
But I
Birdman
remember,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, and then when the Spaniards coming over and like combining Catholicism and things definitely melded together. I mean, it's there. And even when I was working with Three Bone on the different, I mean, we're still in the middle of having the trilogy produced by Luis Alfaro, but he references multiple times like these Aztec gods, and they will transform into different things and come to Earth. I mean, I think you can find it in just about all cultures. Because I can't really think
Hmm.
of some sort of a culture where you don't find some sort of a humanoid being or deity that will transform into something animalistic. So it's definitely there. It's just
Hmm.
it wasn't with like one of the ones I grew up with, and I guess I would have to explain my background a little bit more, because I know my parents were both Catholic who converted to Christianity in their teens. And so then some of this superstitious stuff and more of the things that kind of delved into the Aztec things and like witchcraft and stuff, it was like we have to stay away from that and not
Yeah.
talk about it because that was kind of evil. And so I don't think I was exposed to some of those things as much. Like Quetzalcoatl, I remember having to study that in school, so I got a lot more information on that as I because I had to study it, but it was definitely not something that I talked about as much because then a lot of these Catholics in the Latin American countries that then convert to Christianity, it kind of falls in the same vein like here in the United States of America with you've got the Christians who are like, yeah, I celebrate Halloween, and then the other ones are like, keep that away, like we don't touch that because
Yeah.
it's evil, instead of kind of just like understanding the story for where it came from and like the folklore and the reason that these stories would have been told in the past because really they were like lessons for humanity. But yeah.
Yeah, and Ian, you're absolutely right because we can look at characters and stories from throughout the world where there is a transformation going on. Obviously, Greek mythology, Zeus is always turning himself into animals, right? To either he's turning himself into a bull or a swan, and then even even in Hinduism too, there are stories of the
Mhm.
gods turning themselves into animals. So it's not something that is unique to one culture or anything like that. Do you know, or have you ever heard of any of these kinds of beliefs kind of continuing? Do people still talk about, oh, I remember, Uncle Ramon back in the day, he said he met someone who could turn into, you know, a jaguar, and he go live in the jungle for a month. Did you
I didn't
have there
really
been
grow
any
up with
stories like
anyone
that?
saying anything like that um in particular. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really grow up with anything like that. I don't know. I wish I had more to say about
No,
that,
you're
but
fine. You're fine. So you did answer a question that I had that I'd written down earlier about characters like La Llorona. If they're specific to like one culture, they kind of have variations throughout, Latin American and Hispanic culture, right? Um, so I do want to go back to that. So to your point, I mean, the story of La Llorona, there is a base underlying foundation, right? It's a woman who is crying about the loss of her children. Now, how she loses those children will vary from country to country, as you said.
mhm.
How how is it that um how is it that that this one particular person will have these different variations, all over Latin America? Because you said the Mexican version, she's very much dressed in white, whereas did you say it was like Costa Rican or Central American that
Well,
she's
no,
just
it light blue. So like everywhere it
okay?
was light blue. It wasn't until like that movie came out that suddenly everyone said she was dressed in white. Because even like the Mexican folk song, the traditional Mexican folk song, she was
Okay.
always dressed in light blue. So it was the movie where suddenly everyone's like, "Oh, she's in white." And I think that, I mean, I don't know, it was probably an aesthetic choice that they made, but it was always light blue. Like even at
Yeah.
like someone from Mexico, doesn't matter what region they're from, the song says she was in light blue because that verse is one of the verses that just about everyone knows. Because you can go to a region and like every area will have their own verses for like what they sang. And I think that's just part of oral history telling, like the passing down of things, that tradition of sitting down and like telling scary stories, and
Hmm.
whether it's by song or not, like everyone's gonna have their own variations. Like you can when I did Borderline and I looked up because the playwright had said like have the song for La Llorona in here, I like had to figure out what verses I wanted to use in that because there's just like countless variations of them because it's all just to the same tune, kind of like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is also the ABCs.
Right. Except it's about a woman, crying about her dead kids. Um, instead of a
Yes, yeah,
poem.
because you've got the verse about how her lover's never gonna forget her. There's a verse about her going through like the biggest pain she's ever felt. There's just like so many different verses in it. It just kind of, and it just depends on what take of the story you're going into. Like there's another verse like, because I know you can find a lot of women singing it online, but like this one verse that I really like is Aunque la vida me cueste llorona, no dejaré de quererte. And so that's like from the perspective of the lover. And so it's like, even if it's going to cost me my life, I'm never going to stop loving you. So it just, they're all, it just depends on where you are.
Yeah, and that makes sense too because if it's a song that everybody learns and at that time it's based on memorization, obviously if you like add in one thing or omit another thing that kind of starts the ball rolling because now when you transmit that version that becomes like I wouldn't say an official, but that becomes like another branch in how people understand this particular character. Um, so we did talk about the two big ones right there, the Chupacabra and La
Mhm.
Llorona. Are there um are there any other figures within within Latin superstition or folklore that we don't know about that you feel maybe should kind of get their dues? Because the only other figure I could think of, and the only reason why I know about this is because they made a huge stink about this a few years ago, was the
Okay.
Pachamama idol because they stuck it in St. Peter's, and everybody was making a stink about it, saying, "Oh, well, Pope Francis is officially practicing paganism because he's worshiping the Pachamama." But do you know of any other, or have you, or are you familiar with any other, folklore figures in Central America or South America that you were exposed to that maybe haven't been familiarized with the wider world?
Yes. So I picked two because I know there's a lot. So one of them I didn't realize until I was older that I was singing about a folklore legend. So I actually have a CD here. So when I was a kid living in Costa Rica, there was this pop star named Faye that I
Okay.
listened to a lot, and I really, really liked her. This was like I think her second album or something, and I didn't realize it until much, much later. But like my favorite song from this one was called Popocatépetl. Popocatépetl. I guess it's like a tongue twister, and
Yeah.
I did not know, but apparently that is the name of a volcano in
Yeah.
Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the name of a volcano in Mexico, and there's like this whole legend behind it. And I didn't know, it's like, because sometimes you sing a song when you're a kid and you don't really understand the lyrics of what you're singing. And there's
Yeah,
this
like London
story.
Bridge, for example. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Or Ring Around the Rosie, that one too.
Yep.
So Popocatépetl was a Aztec warrior, and he was in love with, again, I'm not good at pronouncing these, but it's Iztac. I wrote this down because it was going to be bad. Iztaccatl. She was a princess. She was an Aztec princess. And then the legend is that he was sent off to war. Like they were allowed to marry on the condition, like the chief said, you can marry my daughter, but you must go back out to war, and then you can come back to see her, because he was kind of hoping he would die.
Hmm.
And he did not die, but somehow it got back to her, the princess, that he had died. And so then she dies of grief. And so then he comes home back to her and then finds out that she had been told he had died, and then she died of grief. So then he dies of grief right next to her, and then they
Hmm.
became the volcanoes, which are that's what the volcanoes are named after, and they're two like semi-active volcanoes. And so they say when they're active, it's like them like longing for each other because they miss each other. So the song in this is like this epic dance number, and I love it. And it was so fun. And the song is from the princess's perspective, and it's about like dancing on the volcano and having a great time, but also at the same time she's singing about how it's like driving her crazy that he's not there with her. I was like, oh, like for a dance number this is actually pretty dark and like really really bitter. And so in
Yeah.
it she like sings about gouging her eyes out because she's in like pain. And so I just thought that was really cool because like, oh, this is like a legend that then in the 90s became like part of our pop culture. Like I would dance to this again. And as you can see, like there's more pop stars and stuff becoming more popular now, like Shakira. Obviously everyone knows Shakira now in the United States. I'm not entirely sure why Faye didn't get more popular here, but I do think like a lot of these things are just going to become more part of the United States culture and not necessarily just stay. Because Shakira, she actually got famous like right around the same time that this artist was getting super famous, and so they've got stuff in their songs where they've got lyrics and things that go back to it. Just not all of them are going to be scary, and not everyone is necessarily going to be making movies about them. Another big one that I kind of grew up with is like, and I think this is like everywhere, it's El Duende. And you can find it in all the cultures. Like when your things go missing, well, who took it? El Duende. And so like I know in Irish you've folklore, like you got the like leprechauns, or you got elves, or there's goblins or imps. So El Duende, and then also very very regional depending on where you're at. Sometimes El Duende can be like they're always mischievous, but they're not always evil. But
Yeah.
like if you misplace something, sometimes they're just like little creatures that are there to help you. Like if you're lost and you don't want to be lost, so then you're kind of like, well, maybe El Duende will come help me. And it just kind of depends on where you are. But it like if things are misplaced in the house, then you might, ay, los duendes nos están escondiendo las cosas, like they're hiding our things in the house, or they could like bring you good luck and stuff. And they're small and they're supposed to be silly. And then like I always think of like the, like I know everywhere has their different variations of like fairies or elves or leprechauns, and just like these little creatures that depending on which way you want to go, they could be evil, they could be good. But there's definitely like a Latin American twist to it that you can find. So that would be another one. But then, like I said, like I feel like you can find El Duende just about anywhere. But that's I grew up with El Duende and hearing about that before I heard about like the elves and the fairies and the leprechauns and yeah.
So El Duende, so they you said that they're mischievous
Yeah.
sprites. Are they do they have like a set form? Because I know with leprechauns, for the most part we know what they are because they've got the red chin strap beard and the green suit and everything. Or elves, you know, barring Tolkien's interpretation, they usually have like the pointy hat and all that stuff. Is there a recognizable form of El Duende, or is it kind of, are they just amorphous creatures who kind of shapeshift?
Oh, so they can shapeshift, but they'll also, like if they're in their form, like I've heard them described as little old men, or like having a pointy hat. Um, yeah, kind of like wrinkly, not exactly the most appealing thing to look at, kind of like impish.
Mhm.
So they would look more like a goblin or an imp rather than something cute, if that makes
Okay.
sense. And then they
No, I
would
got
kind
you.
of like a little hat. and they would be small. But then again, like they can shapeshift as well, into if they want to be something else, if they don't want to be in their true form.
So so with creatures like that, I know in some religions, there's this idea that you kind of have to leave an offering out for them to appease them, otherwise they might go on the war path and they might wreak
Yeah.
havoc in your life and cause all these things. Is that something that's common in Latin American culture, or is that seen more as like a paganistic kind of view of things?
No, well, a lot of Latin Americans are Catholics. So that is also a thing. Like you can leave offerings for Duende. I know there's ofrendas for Dia de los Muertos is a big thing.
Yep.
And then the Three Kings Day. Why did I suddenly blank out on what that's called in Spanish? But that's another one. Dia de los Reyes. Dia de los Reyes. But that's another one where you can leave things out, and that would be more like in relation to Christmas.
Yeah.
They,
So
they
kind of
will
like
celebrate.
Krampus or the Magi kind of thing.
Yes, yeah. So that one would be the Magi. And
Okay.
then you can leave things out.
Yeah, because when I was a kid, I was taught about how there are like these like trickster spirits that kind of like live in every house, and you kind
Yeah.
of like have to leave an offering for them, because if you don't leave like a cookie or something for them, then when you wake up in the morning, you try to look for your keys, for instance, they're not there because the
Hmm.
spirits, they were so mad that they weren't given anything, that they took them and they won't give them back to you. So a lot of what you're saying actually sounds pretty familiar to my to me, because I grew up in in a household where even though ostensibly we're Christian, we also kind of still cling on to these old beliefs. It's amazing too, because even in the 21st century, you would think that the belief in something that's very old school, very silly almost, is a waste of time, and yet people still cling on to them because there is some cultural relevance to this. So can you talk about how these supernatural beliefs and folklore and practices kind of remain relevant to you? Because because anybody, I myself, I could just easily say, well, to hell with this. Like I'll have none of this. I will just believe in science altogether. But I
Yeah.
still find myself leaving something out for every November or every April for for the New Year's, right? So it's not like
Mhm.
we can just easily dispense with it. So how has it kind of affected and influenced you, as a person in your craft, in theater?
Sure. So I know for me, like, I don't personally believe in a lot of it. I'm definitely not a superstitious people, and like you said, I work in theater, and I one of the theaters I work with, everyone believes is haunted, and so some people will even go into the theater and they're like, "Hi, friends," because they think they have to say hi to the ghosts before they go in there.
Yeah.
And I'm not, and I don't believe that. And they've got their legends. As far as I remember, the youth said, "Oh my gosh, the deacon was here. Did you see Miss Jackie that he blew out one of the lights?" And I'm like, "Oh, did he?" And I'm thinking to myself, he did not. Do you know how old this building is? That's why the light blew out. But
But you kind of
I
have
think
to
it,
humor them at the same
yeah,
time.
yeah, no, I would not do. I would never. I'm a teacher, and I'm a nice teacher. I'm not gonna crush their spirit, because I think there is like camaraderie, like talking about those things, just having something that you can relate to, but also just tradition. Like there's some things that you just do because it's tradition. And so like I'm a Christian, and I'm like a Christian to the point where like I went back to study the Greek and Aramaic, and I can translate things from the Bible and kind of have a better understanding of where they come from and like why those things are the way they are. But I'm not so Christian to the like I think most people acknowledge that Jesus Christ was not actually born on December 25th, because that's it's just it would have been too cold culturally. But the thing is, whether or not it's true or not, if there's something like good or something that you enjoy out of it or something that just becomes a bonding experience, then what's the wrong in that? There's a reason why we have these stories that we share with other people. There's lessons that can be learned, there's traditions that can be made, and sometimes you don't need to understand like exactly why they came to be just to have that pure enjoyment from them. When the kids at the theater are telling me, "Oh my gosh, the deacon was here," they're not actually scared when they come to tell me about it. It's more of like exciting and like, "Ooh, this happened." Now, if somebody
Yeah.
was legitimately terrified, I might be like, "Hey, maybe we should talk or like get you some help." But when some of these traditions and stories and folklore are just about like coming together, like the song of La Llorona, where people kept adding verses and verses to it, it's about sitting by the fire and telling like a spooky ghost story, essentially. And even El Chupacabra, like I, I don't believe El Chupacabra was real. Was there something biting the livestock? Absolutely. But people, like, it was a fun thing to go talk about at school and like get a t-shirt from El Chupacabra because it was just one of those things that's fun. It's how I think just part of our humanity, people bonding together.
But but also too, I mean, some of these stories, have some significance or they're attached to a particular culture, right? So,
Yes.
uh, so to be a part of that culture is to have a familiarity with it, but to also have to a degree an appreciation for it, right? I mean, not everyone is going to look at La Llorona and say, "Oh yeah, she's it. Like she's a great role model." I mean, depending on the story that you're familiar with,
Yeah.
you're probably going to think to yourself, "Yeah, I don't know if she's a great role model for a parent," but at the same time, you kind of have the sense of almost the sense of ownership, and I would even say accidental ownership, right? Because as much as you want to disown La Llorona, as a person, as a figure in Mexican or Costa Rican or Argentinian culture, like she she kind of represents what it means to be a part of this community. Do you sort of feel the same way when you look at these stories and these characters like La Llorona or Chupacabra? Like a sense of ownership, like, yeah, this is part of who I am in terms of this is who I am as a Costa Rican or a Mexican or what have you.
I do, because I would say it's definitely part of where I came from, because there's going to be other legends and folklores from other cultures that I don't understand. And
Hmm.
so I wouldn't have grown up with some of those superstitions and fears and wouldn't be able to relate to them, like the boogeyman. I don't really grow up with the boogeyman because I want to say that's mostly an American thing. Because I grew up with a chupacabra in La Llorona instead of like the boogeyman, and it wasn't until like I was a lot older I would start hearing things like I can there's still some things culturally that I just wasn't exposed to, so I might not have that nostalgia factor or that ownership factor of it. So I do think it can be very, very specific to your culture, and you're going to definitely be more attached to it. I appreciate learning about other cultures, and I like seeing how like other cultures have like all their different variations of it, but there is definitely that thing that like this is mine, because I'm not gonna go around talking about a leprechaun, but I'm probably gonna talk about a duende. Like I don't think the leprechaun's gonna come and take my gold or something.
Right, right. But but El Duende has more relevance because this is something. These are stories that you've been exposed to since you were a child. Um,
Yes.
so another thing that I do want to ask you too, because we've talked about several characters in Latin American folklore, some familiar and others not so familiar to us. With
Mm-hmm.
the obviously we're starting to see a shift in demographics in the United States, where we're starting to see more, a higher growth in Hispanic communities all over the United States, right? Do you think it will get to a point where these stories and these legends start to become more commonplace, that people will begin to, talk about El Duende as they do La Llorona? Because La Llorona, the I wouldn't say the phenomenon, but the awareness of it has only been what, 6 years, 6 years old at this
Yeah,
point.
it's still pretty new and like, yeah. Um, I guess it depends on which ones. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's going to be mostly your Mexican folklore that's going to come over here because that's primarily what I have seen. As a Latin American in this country, those are generally the ones that you hear the most about. Because like Dia de los Muertos, I probably found out about that around the same time most of the United States was like really getting into it, or like even Cinco de Mayo, well, people were like just looking for an excuse to have a margarita. Because I would even have people being like, "Oh, are you gonna celebrate Cinco de Mayo?" And I would have to like be like, "What?" Because I really understand at first what Cinco de Mayo was until it had gained popularity. Because for me, it's el 15 de septiembre. It's September 15th because that's the Independence Day of Costa Rica. So like that's what I would
Yeah.
have grown up with. So yeah, they're actually absolutely going to get more popular. I also think like probably some Puerto Rican ones would be like the second biggest one to come in, although I know there's different places with huge Puerto Rican populations where it probably feels a lot more common there to have some of their stuff. And the Puerto Rican, I'm definitely not as um, familiar with, but I do know that it will probably get more known. But I don't know if people are actually going to start believing in it, or I'm more inclined to think it's going to turn into one of those things where Americans are just looking for an opportunity to get together and have a drink like St. Patrick's Day or Cinco de Mayo just
Right.
because, rather than like actually appreciating where it came from. Because even the like
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
I've had people tell me like, "Oh, La Llorona," and like they watched the movie, but I can tell talking to them like it's not the same. Like they don't really understand everything. They've got the horror movie and that's about it. And the horror movie is it we got exposure, but I don't know, for me it feels different than La Llorona I grew up with.
what's the Hollywood treatment, as when you think about it, because Hollywood tends to take something that's culturally relevant to a certain people, and popularize it, which is great, but
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a double-edged sword, because yeah, it gets exposure and that culture kind of gets its 15 minutes in the spotlight, but at the same time it's a very simplified, watered down version, so it's
Yeah,
compromised.
it is.
And like you pointed out before, I mean, with La Llorona, I mean, everybody, anybody who grew up in that culture will remember the song where she's wearing light blue, whereas someone like me, who didn't know too much about it until a few years ago, I just assumed she always wore white, because if she's a ghost, ghosts wear white, and that's what you go with. Do you, as someone who works in within a creative capacity, do you sort of feel there's a responsibility, or do you sort of feel like there's a duty on your part to kind of make sure that these stories get told, but they get told the proper way, not like having Madonna play this sexy witch who's going around screaming and draining the life out of men? I say that because I was thinking of Evita, and we talked about Evita before we
Yeah,
started
yeah,
recording.
I do, but I think maybe I might have a different opinion than some other people. I love a fan fiction. I
Mhm.
really do. I just think if you're going to do something like that, you still have to kind of maintain the heart of it. So I'm okay with changing things up, but just don't change the heart of it. Because actually it was like I mentioned before, I think that Medea from Greek mythology and La Llorona just have so much in common, and it was actually Luis Alfaro's interpretation of Medea in the play he wrote Mojada, where I actually felt like for the first time I had ever seen her like as a humanized character. And Medea has so many interpretations of
Oh
how
yeah.
that story is told and how that story is written. And it was the first time I had seen it where I even like sympathized with the person her husband had an affair with. Or I grew up thinking like Medea was just like this awful person, like, oh my gosh, how dare you kill your children? Who does that? Because the mother is such an important figure, and you would never think that, especially in Hispanic society, like that's the comforter, that's the person you go to. And so La Llorona was seen as like super evil. At least that's how I had grown up with her, even though there are these interpretations where she's softer. I grew up with La Llorona as just purely evil. But
Yeah.
then I loved Luis Alfaro's interpretation of Mojada, like Medea, because he humanized her and he made her different, but then he still, I felt like, kept the heart of that story. So I don't mind changes, but I think the changes need, if you're going to change it to like make it more relatable, you still need at the center of it to keep the heart of it. So like when I did Borderline, um when I was working on that show as a director, and I was trying to keep intact the interpretation that I found of La Llorona in there with the character of Veronica, where this was like not the evil La Llorona. There were all kinds of myths in that one. We had El Chupacabra in that one as well. But in that one, we had the
Mm.
softer interpretation of La Llorona, just kind of like looking to find these children. And so I would keep an eye out on other people who were working and producing it. And I found this one where they changed her dress to red. And that really bothered me because it was like, that seems like a senseless change. And I didn't understand that one because I think it was like marketing or something. Like the red looked better. And it was like, well, that's just vain and stupid. And so like that bothered me. And also because as a costumer, like red is not really a soft color. That's bold, and that can also come off as like really evil almost. And for that interpretation of La Llorona, even though I grew up with an evil La Llorona, the heart of La Llorona in this interpretation was, we're going with the soft and caring mother who's like yearning and searching for her children, and you made her in red. So that director that chose to have her in red, even if though it was just for the marketing, it really bothered me. So I just think I don't care about changes. If it adds to the story and doesn't take away from the center heart of it, I might go for it, because we're all artists for a reason.
Yeah. But at the same time, if you're making these changes, they should be calculated.
Yes.
They shouldn't be red because, oh, it's cool because the devil is red. Get it?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Um. So so really the last point I want to I want to get across from you, and Jackie, I do thank you for offering your expertise on this, because this is something that I never really would have known too much about without your help in this.
Mm,
But but another thing I wanted to ask you too is because when and you've mentioned this several times as well. How is it that these stories help you appreciate, the work that you do in theater? Because you mentioned that that a different take on Medea kind of helped you understand what was going on with La Llorona, because La Llorona was initially seen as an evil figure until you looked at her through the lens of Medea, where her husband just ditches her for a younger woman. How have these stories from from your childhood and from Latin American culture how they kind of informed you in your work and helped you appreciate, the work that other, the works of other playwrights and other dramaturgs.
So specifically like Latin American ones or just in general?
Well, let's go ahead and just say just in general, but we'll include Latin American in the mix. So like
Okay.
for instance, like has the story of La Llorona helped you appreciate, I don't know, Shakespeare, for instance, in Titus Andronicus, for example. That yeah, just kind of like a way to make you think about how these stories make you understand and appreciate what is going on here.
Okay. So for working in a horror theater company, because I'm officially the production manager for Postmortem Players as well. Uh, People like to get scared. It's not something I ever liked as a kid, and honestly, I wouldn't say I like enjoy jump scare type of person, but I do know that people they get enjoyment out of going to see horror things, and I actually get enjoyment out of figuring out how to make things look real so that people can get scared. So
Hmm.
for me, especially since I wasn't a kid who ever went to a haunted house, I also wasn't allowed to celebrate Halloween because my parents, not until I was 12 years old, um, yeah, I could not celebrate Halloween because my parents thought it was like unchristian. And so a lot of the things that I think of when I'm planning for horror and directing horror is I remember that as a little kid, and actually, like looking back, it's probably good that my parents didn't let me see a lot of that stuff because I scared easily. Like, I could watch a movie that wasn't intended to be scary and I would have nightmares. So, when I'm directing a lot of these horrors and things, or even helping other directors as far as trying to put on something scary. Like right now, we've got the Curse of Krampus coming up, and so that'll go into that lore with those the creatures, because we got Frau Perkta and Krampus and these little gremlin like creatures called the Kalankinsaros, which I kind of also think of like little duendes.
Yeah.
And then who was the other one? The Yule Cat. And so like for I believe I want to say it's the Germans. If I'm wrong, I'm so sorry. But like that would have been their lore as kids, as far as, oh, this is what I grew up with, and like I have to behave, or like Krampus is going to get me. And so even though like the lores aren't the same in what I'm trying to do to like scare people, or maybe even be just like a helping hand for other people working on things where they're trying to scare people, I remember the feeling of like hearing the little ghost stories, or like being at school and people talking about like, oh, I looked outside and I think I saw a chupacabra, and you're just like listening, and there's definitely like a thrill and a suspense even if you're not actually seeing anything. And so when I'm directing people specifically and I want them to, when like we're working on acting, to remember things from their childhood and what it felt like, I will go back to those stories, because really a lot of those things would have been um what scared me and would have been what I grew up with, since I didn't like have your traditional horror things. And so I'll look back to that, and then I will use it in my direction, whether or not it's like obvious to the actors that I'm working with. And so like I guess that would probably be the biggest way for me that I use that. I like to tie things together and find the similarities in things, because I'm really big on no matter what show you're working on, there's always something new you can learn. So for when I worked on Borderline, like these things came up a lot more specifically because they were addressed in the script. And a lot of the people, actually, not a lot of the people, everyone in the cast was Latin American. So we were able to talk and reflect about how they impacted us when we were growing up. Because not everybody was born in the United States of America. Some people were born in the different countries. But then I could be working on something like Krampus, and then it's more of what, like for example, Chupacabra. When I was a little girl, I don't, this again, like totally just me, all in my head. El Chupacabra, I pictured having like bright red eyes and being like this tall figure on 2 feet with almost like a giant like vampire like thing. And I think it's because one time my grandma tried to explain to me that there wasn't actually a chupacabra, but it was probably just like little bats that were hungry and were like going out to bite the goats. But then I drew like this mental picture because the brain, like your mind does way more scary things. And I use that as a director. You let the mind run wild and like numb the senses, you're going to come up with more scary things than you can actually show on stage. So then, like, go thinking about Krampus that's coming up, the director. So she's got like ideas for what she wants things to look like. And so I know, like, kind of like her vision for Krampus being like this big towering figure actually reminds me of like what I used to think of as El Chupacabra when I was a kid. Now she doesn't know that. But then again, it's the, what are we trying to do? Get the feeling of being scared. And so, and because that's what people want to do, they want to go to the theater and they want to be scared and they want to have fun. So then, primarily, like at this point, that's what I reflect on these things mostly. Just like, what was it to be scared? What did it feel like to be scared? And what kind of images was I painting in my mind? Like also like La Llorona can be like compared to the Banshee as
Yeah,
well. Yeah,
yeah.
so just kind of like I end up tying, like as a director, all these connections. And also I used to I taught dramaturgy for a while as well. So these things, they're never really gone. They're always going to pop up and I'm always going to talk about them. Um or at least remember them and know how they're going to influence things that I'm working on. So hopefully that kind of answered your question.
No, it certainly did because it's not because it's not static. It's not just relegated to childhood memories or to the page of a book. It's something that's real, and I would even say lived in too. Because even if it doesn't live, in its present form, let's take for instance Chupacabra. Even if the Chupacabra doesn't stay, in it remain in its regular form, the way that you imagined it,
Yeah.
it gets reinterpreted as a version of Krampus that that best exemplifies how you imagine true terror would look like.
Hmm.
So I can definitely get where you're coming from, but Jackie, I do want to be respectful of your time, so thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming on the show. And guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let us know down in the comments below what topics or movies would you like us to explore in Myth, Magic, and Movies. And as always, we'll catch you in the next one. Appreciate it.